Hi everybody, and welcome to my presentation on trauma, polyvagal theory and the gift of yoga, breathwork and meditation practice. The goal of my presentation is to give you all a framework about the nervous system and providing the framework through the lens of polyvagal theory. And I think it's such an incredible way to understand that organ and something that we're seeking to bring health and well-being to. The other thing that I think about in this presentation and give to you is one of the things that can really injure our nervous system is traumatic exposure. So I'll be also providing a framework around what trauma is and how we would think about that in terms of mental health. Many of us are brought to the field of health and well-being because of our own traumatic experiences, and many of us are on a journey to make sense of those injuries and to bring health and healing to our own systems, and in so doing provide opportunities for other people to come to a place of health and healing as well. And yoga, breathwork, meditation, a combination of these or all of the above are incredible mechanisms for bringing health and well-being to nervous systems that have experienced injury. And when we have experienced injury within that system, it can be very difficult to move through the world in a regulated kind of way. I'm very passionate about polyvagal theory. My name's Simon DuBois and I'm a psychologist at the Health Lodge Integrated Medical Centre. We are an integrative practice and a polyvagal informed practice, which means we think fundamentally about the health of a person's nervous system because it often acts as a very important component, if not a bedrock from which health for other parts of our system can be derived. So I see it as an incredibly important part of our system's health to be considered and cared for and resolved if there is harm there. As a psychologist, I've got a number of modalities that I work from. One of those is EMDR, or Eye Movement Desensitisation and Reprocessing. Another modality that I work from that I'm a great fan of is IFS, or Internal Family Systems, and then finally a polyvagal or polyvagal theory perspective. So I hope you find the next couple of hours really engaging and help to give you a framework of understanding about what it is that you're informing through yogic and breathwork and meditation practices to support your own health and the health of those people that are in your care. So, two acknowledgements. So the person that developed the polyvagal theory framework is Stephen Porges, and he's been working on this perspective and understanding from the early 90s. So his work is prolific around this and very informed. His work is understood to be quite medical and quite complex, and there are people, thankfully, that have translated his work into a more everyday and practical application. And one of his closest colleagues in that endeavour is Deb Dana, and it's her work from which I've drawn most of my understanding from. But as you'll see, in this space of polyvagal theory, there are many people who have taken to the work and support us and help us to understand the underlying mechanisms, the theory, and how to apply it. Deb Dana is one of those, and she's the one I've sort of chosen to follow, but it's really worth looking into that literature and that space, either in terms of the books or online, and you'll see many really well thought of and considered presentations of polyvagal theory and how to apply it to oneself and how to apply the understandings of this theory and practice to other people. So let's get started with understanding just sort of the key components of the theory. So poly means many and vagal means wandering. So we are talking about our autonomic nervous system, and aspects of that nervous system have vagal nerves running through it as well. But this whole system really moves through the whole of our body and is linked to and connected to many organs that make up the human body. So polyvagal theory is an evolutionary theory, a neuroscientific theory, and a psychological theory about the role of the autonomic nervous system in our emotional regulation, social connection, and fear responses. So one of the ways that we can think about the autonomic nervous system is a control system that acts largely unconsciously and regulates our bodily functions, our physiological reactions for safety, and also facilitates social connection. And polyvagal theory focuses on the structure and function of two parts of the autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic nervous system, and in particular the two strands of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the ventral vagal and dorsal vagal nervous system, and we'll be talking about those in much more detail as this presentation progresses. And I guess the really interesting thing about polyvagal theory is that it proposes that the vagal system or the vagal nerve inhibits our primal instincts of fight, flight, freeze, submit, so that feelings of safety can be experienced, which allows for social connection. So let's bring in a framework of understanding around mental health and thinking about the place of traumatic exposure and how that impacts our mental health. So in the context of polyvagal theory, the term regulated and dysregulation, regulation, dysregulation is used a lot. And, it's interesting as the years go by, I notice that it's becoming part of everyday vernacular as well. But one way to think about mental distress in the broader sense is that it is a dysregulation of our system, a dysregulation of our psychological system, a dysregulation of our emotional system. And then more broadly, we can think about it as being a problem with nervous system regulation. That is, our nervous system is prone to getting over-regulated or getting under-regulated to responses of experience, and there's then a whole symptom picture in and around our psychological and emotional experience that then can be quite distressing. When I'm thinking about trauma and traumatic injury, we're talking about experiences that people have had which have severely impacted the person's ability to regulate their nervous system because of the intense damage done by the experience itself, the experience that the person has been exposed to. So as a consequence of that injury, the nervous system now reacts to experiences rather than responding to things in a regulated kind of way. Or should we experience dysregulation, that our capacity to come back to a regulated state and move through it is very difficult and can take a long time. And when we're in a place of dysregulation, it really impacts our mental well-being, our capacity to think, our capacity to stay emotionally calm or regulated under distressing situations, then our capacity to communicate, our capacity to connect with people when we are at a time of distress or a time of need. In talking to Mark Purser about this, he mentioned that this correlates with quite a number of yogic concepts, which are listed there. So I hope with this talk you're starting to make links between what you have learnt from a yogic perspective and how they connect to and relate to what is considered within the framework of polyvagal theory. Our nervous systems are exposed to a myriad of stresses. Over the past 2 or 3 years, they have been incredibly extreme. And the possibility of those extremes being within our environments are maybe ones that are sustained and continue over time as we see the impacts of the climate crisis and that generating severe and significant weather events more often. While the pandemic on some level may feel like it was a while ago, it was only a little while ago, and within that experience there were extreme and intensive experiences for people on all sorts of levels. And of course there are the affairs of the world, but not only that, the affairs that we are exposed to in our everyday lives. The importance of being able to recognise the stress levels within our systems and being able to care for them and hold for them and make sure that there is a level of health which allows us the regulated capacity to move through difficulty can't be underestimated. And this is really a fundamental goal of polyvagal theory in its clinical application, is to support people to have a greater awareness of what's happening in their internal system and have the capacity to bring healing to it. So as mentioned before, trauma can really affect our capacity to stay regulated. One of the ways that we talk about that in psychology is the window of tolerance. When we have a large window of tolerance, it means our capacity to sit with distress is one in which more things, or perhaps more extreme things, can influence us, but we stay grounded in that. However, when trauma has affected our window of tolerance and decreased it, it means that we have a much greater susceptibility and sensitivity to falling out of that window, and then as a consequence experiencing dysregulation. When we're dysregulated, our systems can go one of kind of two fundamental ways. One is into hyperarousal, characterised by feeling extremely anxious or angry or out of control. It's a very elevated state that feels kind of very energised and more chaotic, a bit like a volcano blowing. Or we go into hypoarousal, which is a shutting down, dissociation, going numb, feeling frozen. Again, we're going to feel this out a lot more as we move through this talk, and how that is the kind of the framework of understanding around it from a polyvagal perspective. But again, just bringing us back to yoga and breathwork and meditation practices, they are all kind of fundamentally driven towards supporting people to have a more robust and bigger window of tolerance with themselves, so that things can be negotiated with a sense of capacity and regulation. But I really like the notion of window of tolerance, and just an invitation for you to think about, just, on the spot now, how you consider your window of tolerance. Would you like it to be larger? Do you feel like it's very small? Is it something that you've been able to grow and increase in size over the years, or has there sort of been a sense that it's kind of got compromised? However, whatever the size of that window, being engaged in disciplines like yoga and yogic practice inevitably support us to grow and develop our window of tolerance. And just a couple of quotes to really emphasise the importance of nervous system regulation. This one from Stephen Porges. If we can't regulate our physiological state, which is a brainstem responsibility, then we have difficulties accessing and processing higher cognitive functions. So in short, we need to be able to think. We have to stay regulated. And under stressful circumstances, usually it's pretty important to keep that capacity for staying aware and mindful and thinking. And this quote from Bessel van der Kolk: learning to regulate your autonomic arousal system is maybe the single most important prerequisite to dealing with PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Physiological arousal needs to be calmed down before you can even access your executive functioning and the rational part of your brain. So coming then to yoga, breath work and meditation, these practices are all the means by which the nervous system can be retrained or healed, so that it can respond to experiences rather than go into reaction. And this is really where the gift lies with these systems that you're learning and working with. I mean, it really does assist us to improve the nervous system's capacity to regulate in the face of stress. It increases our window of tolerance to stress, which is incredibly important. And we just know how difficult and distressing it is when we're unable to tolerate stress. And in the experience of that, we feel ourselves losing ourselves or breaking down in moments and times where it's often the most important for us to be able to function. So what are we developing to assist in that process? Well, polyvagal theory, I think fundamentally is really just another way, but an incredibly effective way of developing observer awareness. That is, observer awareness specifically orientated to seeing the nervous system, being able to notice what state it's in. Is it regulated or dysregulated? Being able to see in particular when it's in a state of dysregulation. And then from that observation point, being able to consciously facilitate consciously facilitate soothing of the nervous system, or consideration and connection to the nervous system, and in that a soothing of it, so that we move from a place of reaction to a place of regulation rather than dysregulation. So this framework, again, really helps us develop the eyes to notice and feel and see the state of our nervous system. And from that standpoint, when we see dysregulation, being able to apply self-soothing or asking and seeking soothing from another to bring us into a regulated state. So that can we, like Stephen Porges and Bessel van der Kolk mentioned, so that we're able to stay within ourselves in an aware, thinking, regulated space or state while we're coping and managing. So, as I've mentioned here, we're consciously working with our thinking, our physiology, and our behaviour to help calm ourselves. But we need to give our observer the information that's required for it to be able to see and notice what's really important for it to be looking out for. I wanted to provide this slide because it's a simple but important representation of the brain, which has the three main elements or components that we're kind of particularly concerned about with the window of tolerance, regulation, dysregulation, reacting versus responding. And these aspects of the brain are the limbic system, which is considered to be the smoke alarm or smoke detector of the brain. It's this part of the brain which is constantly sensing and feeling out into the environment and noticing and observing all the different feelings and sensations, and I guess I really should say the sort of inputs that are coming from in and around us, and assessing and determining whether they are safe or whether they are dangerous. If the limbic system determines that it's dangerous, then the smoke alarm goes off and information is sent down to the reptilian brain or the brainstem, and a whole cascade of messaging through different chemicals is sent through the body to prepare for that threat. Now, around the limbic system is our neocortex, or what we call our thinking part of our brain. This is where all our executive functions are done. Thinking, considering, problem solving, assessing, looking at information from the past, projecting into the future. And it's this part of our brain which sums up and kind of really assesses. This is where our observer self sits, and kind of just asks the questions, what needs to happen now? What do we need to do next? And it is this part of our brain which will provide a brake on the limbic system if it decides that the limbic system or the smoke detector has gone off. We only want that smoke detector to go off if the house is burning down, not if it's just toast in the toaster that's burned. So often it's our neocortex that supports us to keep things in perspective, and that's really important. You can make a representation of our brain, which is a great one from Dan Siegel, which is there is the limbic system, there is the neocortex, and there is the brainstem. So it's quite a nice way to just remember those fundamental components of the brain. Where polyvagal theory differs, and I think is actually a lot more accurate, is it helps us understand that really our whole autonomic system is a smoke detector. Our whole nervous system through our whole body is assessing and picking up on information, sensory information, and putting it through its own computer of awareness, if you like, to determine whether things are safe or dangerous. So having a level of health through our whole autonomic system is incredibly important, so that that system is working in concert with our environments accurately and effectively. Alright, so getting into polyvagal theory a little bit more deeply now. So some key components of polyvagal theory is that this theory explains the way our autonomic nervous system identifies safety and danger. This theory also describes the way it takes in information and initiates reactions or responses to negotiate daily events safely. And it also outlines a hierarchy of 3 biological pathways of response. So, there are 3 essential elements for safety and regulation as informed by a polyvagal perspective. So the autonomic nervous system looks for important cues in our context of experience, and the things that it's particularly concerned about is the context that we're in, the choices that are available to us in that context, and the level of connection to others within that space from which to find safety and regulation. And when one of these elements is missing or perhaps is confused or not clear, this generates a sense of unease in our nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system prepares for protection. So I think this is really one of my favourite areas of polyvagal theory, and really kind of makes a lot of sense, really helping our observer awareness to understand what it's looking for or what might have caused a sense of unsafety in our nervous system. So again, context is about having a sensed awareness of what's going on, and it makes sense. Choice is around the freedom to move, the freedom to have options, especially when there's doubt about an experience or an environment. And connection is concerned with a sense of connection with other people around you, that there's a sense of availability of them, either as they stand there, availability emotionally or psychologically, or perhaps availability in terms of they're there for me if I need them. So to put this into a kind of practical sense of understanding, so think of the last horror movie you watched. I haven't watched one for a very long time. They do my head in, but if you can remember, perhaps you took yourself out as a teenager. See if you can dredge a horror movie up. But the producers of horror movies use those elements and to really disrupt and cause distress in our nervous system. And for some reason, some people find that good fun. So imagine in this script that the teenagers have just left the frat party and they're driving home, and they have to drive through the dim dark forest. And guess what happens as they're driving through the forest? And I should say, in terms of context, often dim dark forests with kind of strange noises and things is a context which is confusing and unfamiliar. So already we're in a context that's not crash hot. I'm thinking about the horror movie that did my head in when I watched Alien when I was 12 years old at home, and the context was the bunker of the spaceship and the guy had lost his cat down there. But of course, what happens when they're driving through the forest is that choice is denied them, because the car in this particular movie breaks down in the middle of the forest. But not only that, when they hop out, the keys fall out of the driver's hand and they fall down a grate, which happens to be right in the middle of the forest, and the keys are lost. So choice is gone. And then last not the least, but what the producers in these movies will do, like they did in Alien, where the guy went down to look for the cat all by himself, when the kids hop out of the car to look for help, one of them says, let's split up and let's just go separate ways so we find help. So connection is lost because they're all wandering off by themselves. And all of those elements will turn our poor nervous system completely inside out, and we're having the sort of reactive response to that experience that we'll experience if our nervous system experiences distress with all of those elements disrupted in our everyday world. Okay, the 3 organising principles of polyvagal theory. The first one is co-regulation, and for those of you that have had an interest along the way of attachment and attachment theory and have learned a little bit about the importance of attachment between parents and their children, it really speaks to this. Co-regulation is such an important way to support a developing nervous system's capacity to regulate itself, because regulatory capacity has to be taught, and the implicit health in a nervous system comes from growing up in and around a regulated space, and that is usually one in which there have been regulated carers. So for those of us who are bringing a greater sense of regulation and healing to our nervous systems, we may understand and reflect that perhaps the people that raised us or the environments we were in weren't as regulated as they could be, and we have some catching up to do and some work to do in that space. So our autonomic nervous systems are shaped by early relationships. That's really, really important. And the autonomic nervous system is both shaped and regulated through interactions with others, our environment, and ourselves. Hence, coming back to being involved in breathwork, meditation, and yogic practices to help shape our own nervous systems. 2 primary needs need to coexist for the autonomic nervous system. So it's the biological need for connection and the wired-in need for survival. So the autonomic nervous system continually sends and searches for cues of safety and danger, and that's its job. It really is looking for safe places, and then it's making sure that those safe places stay as safe for as long as possible by looking out for those things that can be disruptive. So one of the clues for us about our own healing journey and the benefits of yogic practices is having a look at our own historical experiences growing up, and the extent to which the people around us that took responsibility for our care and upbringing, the extent to which they were regulated in themselves and were able to maintain a consistency in that. Of course, the other important thing we need to be recognised is the degree of traumatic exposure that we've had and the level of injury that's occurred as a result of being in the presence of harmful experiences. So the next organising principle is neuroception, and neuroception is a term that was coined by Stephen Porges, which describes the autonomic nervous system's responsibility or action of receiving information, perceiving information in and around it, and then, as we know, determining whether what it is perceiving through the neurology of its system, whether there is an environment of safety or threat. So the autonomic nervous system takes information without the thinking part of the brain. And I guess in a kind of very fundamental way, one of the things that we're seeking to do as people and humans so that we can support our health and support our well-being is to make things as consciously aware to us as possible. So again, this is where I go back to polyvagal theory being another way where we can bring observer awareness and therefore regulatory capacity to our everyday lives. And this is particularly important if we're aware that our nervous system does struggle with regulation. So the importance of being able to notice when it's under distress and support it to be in a more regulated state is really important. So neuroception is the nervous system's response to cues of safety and danger, and that can be from cues from inside the body or from outside in the environment, and also that which is perceived between people, so between ourselves and other people that we're engaged with. Neuroceptive accuracy, that describes when there's a match between our response or reaction and the environment. So the autonomic nervous system moves into the appropriate energy state, in particular, whether it's into an energy state of safety or an energy state of threat that needs to manage the situation. And neuroceptive mismatch is an experience in which the autonomic nervous system has been shaped in unsafe environments, and as a consequence, their habitual responses are too much or too little for the situation at hand. So neuroceptive, a nervous system that's prone to neuroceptive mismatch is one in which it has been exposed to traumatic exposure, which has caused injury to the nervous system. And they might be single incident, or it might be multiple incident events, or ones in which the nervous system has grown up to environments and the people within it that are unattuned, and as a consequence create a sense of unsafety. So again, yoga, meditation, breath work can help restore neuroceptive accuracy to our system. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of stop for a moment and just coming into a place of self-awareness and seeing in that place of self-awareness, you can just kind of get a sense of and locate your nervous system. And just seeing if you can get a sense of what your nervous system is noticing and perceiving and picking up. What are the cues that it is currently noticing? What is your nervous system assessing and picking up on from within your body? Feelings or what sensations? How is your nervous system interpreting what it's perceiving from within your body? Is there a sense of threat, what it's noticing, or is it safety? To give you an example, my nervous system is noticing a strong, heavy sensation in my forehead, and it's considering that a little bit of a threat. My nervous system senses a relaxedness in my tummy. And it's perceiving that as safe. Just observing and noticing what your nervous system is perceiving within your body and whether it thinks there's threat or danger in what it's noticing. And now taking your awareness to noticing what your nervous system is perceiving in the environment around you. Whether it's light, whether it's visual, whether it's sound, smell, sensations on your body. Just noticing the sensations the nervous system is perceiving from the environment around you. And just get a sense of how your nervous system is perceiving them. Are they a threat? Are they a danger? Or are they seen and felt by your nervous system as safe? Lastly, thinking about, or I should say noticing, what your nervous system is perceiving in the realm of people and connection. May not be people in your vicinity right now, but perhaps there's a sense or a feeling of how your nervous system feels about you being on your own and what you're doing. Perhaps your nervous system has some thought or consideration about contact with people that will happen later or what happened before. How is your nervous system interpreting and feeling or sensing those connections or absence of connection mean? So in a general sense, what are the cues of safety you notice your nervous system sensing? What are the cues of danger that you might be noticing your nervous system noticing? So in a broader sense, considering this question, in this moment with and myself and the environment I'm in, and the people that are in and around me in some way, are actually in danger or am I safe? Perhaps answer that in two ways. One is, does my nervous system think I'm in danger? Does it think I'm safe? And then perhaps from an observer awareness, perhaps we can then answer that question in terms of, am I actually in danger or am I safe? Is there a neuroceptive accuracy between what your nervous system perceives and what the environment is actually like? Or is there a mismatch between the two? The third organising principle of polyvagal theory is autonomic hierarchy, And this speaks to the understanding that our autonomic nervous systems were built over time, over evolutionary time. So this speaks to the fact that polyvagal theory is an evolutionary theory. And the understanding here is that the first part of our nervous system to develop was the part of the parasympathetic system, which was the dorsal vagal system. And this was quite a while ago, and the capacity or the way that this dorsal vagal system worked was that in exposure to threat or danger, the way that this system would protect the organism was to go into immobilization, shutdown, or disconnection. So there weren't a lot of options open, but it was just a closing down. We're often invited to think about the turtle that just kind of recedes and kind of descends into its shell. Moving through evolutionary history, our nervous system started to develop, and we developed a mobilizing system, a system that really allowed us to move and under threat to be able to respond to these threats with a fight or flight response. And then further along, we get to the formation of another parasympathetic part of the nervous system, which was the ventral vagal system. And some organisms in their development found safety in socialization, particularly mammals. Somehow or rather, there was an understanding that being in groups created a much greater sense of safety. But to be in groups, we had to have the ability to identify and notice safety in others, in other animals of our kind, and also to have the ability to suspend aggression so that we could maintain connection. And it's the ventral vagal part of the parasympathetic nervous system which gives mammals and human beings the ability to stay connected and find connection by identifying safety in others and being able to suspend threat responses so that we can keep social connection. So interestingly, when we think about the damaging effects of traumatic exposure, one of the things that it does is it really compromises the capacity to notice and sense in a neuroceptive way safety in others. The tendency with a neuroceptive mismatch is to see the threat in others. And when we are unable to regulate under stress and we dysregulate, then there is an expression of unsafety, which makes it difficult for others to connect or for us to feel confident to connect. So it has a real, traumatic injury has a real disrupting event in our capacity to feel comfortable and safe in the socialization process. So the autonomic, as part of this autonomic hierarchy and the organising principle of that, is an understanding that the autonomic nervous system works in a predictable hierarchy. And that hierarchy, again, is made up of the ventral vagal, the sympathetic and the dorsal vagal systems, and put together, these are known as the polyvagal ladder, which you can see represented there. And I encourage you wholeheartedly to find a polyvagal ladder through Google and print many ladders, put them around your house, and just help your observer awareness notice and observe where you are on your ladder. So let's talk about each part of the autonomic nervous system and the elements that make up each part of these systems. They're quite familiar to us these days. Again, we tend to use the sympathetic state in everyday vernacular, but never a waste of time in reviewing that. And remember, all of this information and what we're doing now is providing your observer awareness with keen information so that it can start watching and noticing really effectively what state we're in, and whether that state is attuned or neuroceptively attuned or accurate to the situation we're in, or mismatched. And in the case of mismatched, we have a conscious capacity and I guess responsibility to help regulate us back into a match. So the sympathetic system, it is mobilized to survive. We know it in terms of a fight response or flight, freeze or fawn. When we are in a sympathetic state but neuroceptively mismatched to our environment, we notice things like being out of sync with others. We tend to get defensive or attacking. We get alarmed by things and very anxious by things. The nervous system is in a hypervigilant state. It misreads cues. Suspiciousness is a term that describes the state the nervous system can be in. And there's a tendency to sacrifice social connection for survival, where we get stuck in that gear. So the parasympathetic system of ventral vagal tends to be switched off. We're not in safe and social at all. And so, yes, we all know it, and it's a distressing state and an exhausting state to be in over a long period of time. So another small exercise for reflection as we consider the sympathetic activation of our autonomic nervous system and what that can mean for us in terms of our own personal experience. What are some of the ordinary difficulties that predictably overwhelm your system? What we're kind of exploring here is thinking about those things that we know ordinarily probably shouldn't dysregulate us. They do. For some reason, they take us out of our window of tolerance. And what we're exploring here is, where do I have consistent neuroceptive mismatches to my environment which activate a sympathetic response? It might be certain people or certain interactions. It might be certain experiences or environments. It might be a smell. Often some of the ordinary difficulties that consistently overwhelm our systems are attached to traumatic experiences. So for example, someone who's had a severe accident in a car can be easily frightened in a vehicle, just feel consistently uncomfortable in a car, or feel really uncomfortable if they're not driving. Then just reflecting on this question, what does sympathetic mobilization look and feel like for you? You're neuroceptively mismatched. mobilisation could, in a sympathetic state, does it look like suspiciousness? Does it look like defensiveness? Control, vigilance, and also thinking about what mobilisation feels like as well. You feel that mobilisation in your body? Is it in the gut, or is it very heady? So perhaps thinking of experiences that consistently dysregulate you, and then feeling into where that dysregulation comes up in the body as a feeling or a sensation. This is incredibly important information because, again, what you're doing right now is giving information to your observer awareness, your observer self, so they can look out for these things and then tap you on the shoulder and go, oh, I think you've just gone into sympathetic. I think there's a bit of a neuroceptive mismatch going on here. What should we do? Maybe it would be good just to bring some regulation to the nervous system so it knows that it's actually okay. Here's another question to explore. When you are activated into a sympathetic reaction, does it tend to have a flavour of flight or a flavour of fight or freeze? Does one tend to fawn? Just thinking about what's the tendency for your nervous system in a sympathetic state. What's the pattern? Fight, flight, or freeze? Again, really helpful information for your observer self, observer awareness to keep an eye open for. Okay, so we have our autonomic nervous system, a great wandering collection of nerves through our body, sending of all the information that travels through that nervous system, 80% of it is going up to be analysed and assessed and used by our brains. 20% going down to instruct and operationalise the body. But you can see that overwhelmingly our autonomic nervous system as an organ, its primary job is to take information in and make sense of that information. That autonomic nervous system is split into two main pathways, if you like, or two main forms. The sympathetic nervous system, which we just talked about, and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is to activate. The parasympathetic nervous system is to deactivate, to slow down. And the parasympathetic nervous system in itself is broken up into two primary strands, the ventral vagal system and the dorsal vagal. Okay, well, the ventral vagal nervous system. When we are in ventral, all aspects of the autonomic nervous system are functioning, and they are functioning in harmony. The parasympathetic system of the dorsal vagus is facilitating digest, rest and restore in concert and in harmony with the sympathetic nervous system, which is regulating blood flow and heart rate, energizing us to meet the demands of the day, mobilizing us and moving us through the world with energy. And the ventral vagus part of the parasympathetic system sits like an enveloping umbrella, if you like, in and around all of the autonomic nervous system, bringing a sense of regulation and safety, connection and creation. So the ventral vagal nervous system is where there is neuroception of safety. It really allows the autonomic nervous system to work really effectively and consistently. And as we can see, it's so important to many of the physiological parts of our system. And we can see just when our sympathetic or dorsal vagal part of our system is working under stress or de-stress, the extent to which it affects the other systems of our body, like digestion and energy and blood flow and heart rate. So ventral vagal supports and encourages socialness, engagement, connection, regulation towards ourselves and co-regulating with others. In ventral vagal, our observer self is working effectively with awareness, and it has an awareness of distress and an acknowledgement of stress. Being in ventral vagal doesn't mean that we are in absence of distress. What it really means is that we are resourced to be in and around our experiences, whether they're ones of actual peace or whether they're ones of which have an element of distress. So observer awareness is present. All our systems are online and we can move fluidly between them. So with this exercise, I just encourage you for a moment to think about what supports you to be in a ventral vagal state. Perhaps thinking about it in terms of who supports a ventral vagal state in your nervous system. What supports you into a ventral vagal state? And I certainly know that for me, meditation, natural environments, my own relatively humble but present yoga practice, perhaps there's a time that is more ventrally vaguely encouraging. Perhaps there are places that really do that as well. This is really, really important information, particularly so if we know that we've experienced our own nervous system injury. We're incumbent on finding and encouraging and determining what supports us to be in ventral vagal and grow the strength and capacity of that state. And equally, what we need to avoid. Those things that just take us out of our window of tolerance so frequently that, it's just unhealthy. So, the dorsal vagal nervous system, part of the parasympathetic system. So, as part of the parasympathetic, its action is to not activate, but to slow down. It is activated when there is a neuroceptive experience or interpretation of experience by the nervous system of life threat. Things are, as far as the nervous system is concerned, things are that dangerous that they are a threat to life. And in that sense of experience, the nervous system activates immobilization and shutdown. The sympathetic nervous system is offline. The ventral vagal system is offline. Remember, when these systems are offline, how they also take neuro and physiological systems offline too. We are neuroceptively mismatched. That is, the nervous system is interpreting life threat, but it's not there. Then we will notice things like collapse, withdrawal, becoming foggy or numb. We know this in terms of the term or idea of becoming dissociated. We're not knowing or feeling or not being within ourselves. People can also experience depersonalization, just not having a sense feeling of themselves, or derealization, where the world feels fuzzy or warped. A person feels like they're just going through the motions, but they're not there. A sense of feeling lost, abandoned, invisible. In an everyday sense, dorsal vagal activation is depression. So in this reflection, is there an experience of dorsal vagal shutdown that's familiar to you? Does that experience of immobilization look and feel like for you? How's it expressed as a feeling or experience in your body? The sorts of thoughts or beliefs that come up. Yeah, just checking in and noticing whether that is an experience that you're familiar with, and again just making a sense of the expressions of that, so that your observer awareness has the information to be able to consciously acknowledge and let you know when you're in that place, when your nervous system has induced immobilization in your system for your protection, because it thinks there is threat so great that it needs to shut you down, and hopefully that threat just goes away. So I mentioned the autonomic ladder a little while back, and here are various iterations of the polyvagal ladder. And this is a great way just to start as a reference point and a cheat sheet to just really get yourself into the practice of noticing the state your nervous system is informed. How do you put this? You've got to get accurate about this. When your nervous system interprets all the information coming in as cues of safety or cues of danger, it then mobilizes your body in response to that. So your observer awareness is noticing the state, and then we are making the assumption that the nervous system has decided that there are cues of safety or danger that are really important to attend to. So, as I mentioned before, it's really good to get quite a few copies of this. This was what I did for a few weeks. Photocopy off of, sort of 10 of them, put one on your fridge, one next to your bed, a couple around the living room, and just start checking in with the state in your body and seeing what state it's in. And then as a consequence of that state, getting a sense of what your nervous system must be sensing to mobilise that state. So just out of interest, where are you on the autonomic ladder right now? Just feeling into sensations and experiences in and around your body, getting a sense of what that would suggest is the state your nervous system is in, and as a consequence of that state, ventral vagal, sympathetic or dorsal vagal, it's informing the feeling and postures and experiences in your body so that you're ready for dealing with or engaging with the environment around you. So the other very interesting conceptual idea in polyvagal theory is the idea of the vagal brake. So the autonomic nervous system is a whole collection of nerves. However, there's one within this whole bundle of nerves which is the vagus nerve. And this vagus nerve is very specific to the process of dampening the sympathetic system so that we can be in a state of ventral vagal safe and social connection. So the vagus nerve and its capacity to put a brake on our sympathetic system is instrumental in helping us as an animal to be an animal that is in groups and in groups of people from which we derive safety. And then within that, the connection, which is actually very healthy for us as human beings as well. So polyvagal theory proposes that the vagal system of the autonomic nervous system inhibits those primal instincts like fight, flight and freeze to allow feelings of safety and social connection to occur. And so as I mentioned, if we have experienced significant traumatic injury, it's actually really tricky to feel safe around others. And so again, for a lot of us, this is where there's some fundamental healing that we're seeking to encourage within our systems. Our nervous systems are always slightly orientated towards sympathetic, and the understanding around that is, we've been for most of our times, millions of years, an animal that needs to maintain a level of alertness for survival. When you think of other animals in the environment, the one I'm thinking of are sort of the wallabies that are in the national park near our house in Iraqwa National Park. They're on alert. When we walk by, there's a very intent kind of looking out, and whenever they're nibbling on grass or whatever, they've always got one eye out. And it's very difficult to kind of be focused and concentrate and connected to someone else when you're in a state of hypervigilant alertness. And this is where the vagal brake really comes into its own. So what we're asked to do to understand how it works is to imagine the brakes on a bicycle, and when the brakes are released, it allows the bike to go faster, and when the brakes are engaged, it'll slow the brake down. So the vagus nerve does the same thing in the sense that when it engages and it will slow our heart rate down. It will slow our breathing rate down. And as a consequence, it reduces the sympathetic state so that we can orientate safely and be focused on the person or people around us. So we can consciously encourage vagal braking as well. And when we think of vagal braking, we can think about that what we are encouraging too is regulation versus dysregulation. And again, this is where we come back to yogic practice and meditation and breath work, because it helps support and encourage our capacity to brake. That is, to regulate and then respond to our experiences in the environment. Again, if we've had a significant psychological injury through traumatic exposure, or we weren't taught very well to brake, or our brakes were damaged because we grew up in environments that were dysregulating, then we can play catch up and get this brake to work really, really well by employing processes and methodologies which support its development. And there's certainly no question in Bessel van der Kolk's mind that yoga is one of those very key ways to help support the strengthening and growth of the vagus nerve, so that we have the capacity to just slow our system down and bring it into a place of safety. And within that safety, connection with ourselves and connection with others. So, when the ventral vagal system is on, or the vagus nerve is on and influencing the pace of our heart and our lungs, there is a gentle braking on those organs and our system, so it is taken out of a more sympathetic state, and in that more ventral vagal state we are able to orientate towards ourselves and those around us. We're able to regulate ourselves and be in co-regulation and connection with the people around us. When the vagus is off and the vagal brake is off, we are in sympathetic, and the sympathetic system is free to engage to address cues of danger. And when the dorsal vagal part of the autonomic nervous system is on, the whole system is closed and shut down. I mean, in some ways this is a bit like a whole braking of the bicycle. Nothing is moving or functioning. As I've mentioned, the functional capacity of our autonomic nervous systems can really be affected by traumatic exposure. And if there are life events that are incredibly distressing or overwhelming for our systems, then we are prone to neuroceptive mismatch. We are susceptible to dysregulation. We are susceptible to being pushed out of our window of tolerances very easily, because the window of tolerance has been made very small, and it makes it very hard for us to move through life experiences in a regulated way. So as a consequence of that, where our systems are more orientated to a sympathetic and dorsal vagal activation, co-regulation, that is our connection with others, can feel unavailable or unpredictable and unsafe. Self-regulation becomes something very hard to do. Coping responses like defensiveness override social engagement, and patterns of protection replace patterns of connection. So we are always fallible to a neuroceptive mismatch rather than neuroceptive accuracy. So Deb Dana provides a very good framework for thinking about how to reshape and repair an injured nervous system, and the acronym for that process is BASIC. I think what's really interesting about this protocol is what you'll notice within it are the sorts of considerations that are inherent in meditative practices and yogic practices. And also what I notice, many of the psychological practices which support to repair the injury caused by traumatic exposure. So the first part of this process is befriending. That is that capacity to tune in and towards autonomic states, and also to have really the ability and willingness to notice rather than avoid. Hence why the autonomic ladders and having those autonomic ladders around us encourages that process of befriending, of tuning in and towards, and just noticing the state that the autonomic nervous system is in. Accordingly, what I think polyvagal theory really provides is the information for our observer aware self or our observer self, the information of what to tune in towards and notice and let us know about. The second part of this process is to attend. That is, name the state, track it, notice shifts and changes, just learning to attend. Again, developing observer self, and now you have some words or some titles to name those states: ventral vagal, sympathetic, or dorsal vagal. And then from that place of conscious awareness to be able to shaping away from habitual survival reactions towards self-regulation and co-regulating responses. So shaping the system so that it has the capacity to respond rather than react. That is to expand our window of tolerance and expand our capacity for regulation. Integrate, being the ability to be able to return to ventral vagal regulation so the shift becomes more fluid and more immediate rather than getting stuck and protracted in those other states. And then finally connecting to self, connecting to other, and connecting to environments that help support us towards regulation and reflection. Dana's protocol really reflects the core purposes and core influence and core effectiveness of meditation, yoga and breath work on developing those very fundamental and important capacities: awareness of self, regulation, within regulation being able to respond. And the thing that I like in particular about yoga is you're supporting the nervous system's health not just through the mental process and avenue of noticing, but through the body, through movement, and through breath. And I think that's incredibly important there. This is where the gift of yoga goes way beyond psychology, and you're using the somatic body to help bring awareness and regulation, neuroceptive accuracy to a system that can have experienced injury, and we're seeking to bring health back to that overall system again. The other thing that's very important about things like yoga and meditation, breath work, is that they are really, I think, like a gym workout or gym workout sessions for getting a stronger and healthier nervous system. We need to exercise the capacity to re-regulate over and over and over again. We need to bring a level of health to our nervous system. We need to bring it back, and to do that we need to keep exercising it and exercising it and exercising it. So having a regular practice helps to bring repair to where injury has occurred. So again, having a regular practices, particularly I think body and breath-based practices, really help in the healing of a nervous system that has experienced injury. As we come to the conclusion of this presentation, I'd like to introduce you to a couple of other practices from Deb Dana's work, which helps support and encourage and exercise the ventral vagal system. And this is a real favourite of mine called glimmers and glows. So glimmers are the micro moments of ventral vagal experience that we routinely experience and appear in everyday life, yet we frequently don't notice them. And there's a real advantage in noticing these, because when we notice micro moments of ventral vagal energy, we also notice that they help us to stay regulated and open to connection. So these glimmers and glows encourage ventral vagal orientation, especially for a sympathetically orientated nervous system. So glows are when you take a micro moment of a glimmer and then notice that, and then really feel into it and accentuate it and turn it into a glow by stopping for a moment and really taking it in and giving it a deeper meaning. So catching these glimmers and accentuating them is a really great way to exercise and strengthen the ventral vagal system. I've got a picture there of light glistening on the water, and this reminded me of a very conscious glimmer that I turned into a glow one day, and I was surfing. There weren't many waves, and I was just looking out into the ocean, and just was at the right time that the sun was bouncing off the little wavelets, and there were all these like shimmers of light, and I just remember sitting there and noticing those little shimmers of light and just really getting captivated by them, and in reflection realizing that I took that glimmer of experience and just really dropped into it. So let's have a practice. I'm conscious that you might be in a fairly urban, man-made kind of space, but just look around you and see if there's a glimmer that you can catch right now. It might be a sensation in the body, it might be a reflection or a memory, or it might be actually something that you can see or notice or feel. But if you could just orientate yourself towards something which brings an glimmering experience, that brings a ventral vagal experience to the system of calming. And then in that, just see if you can notice when you might feel the energy of the ventral vagal in your nervous system, and just bringing observer awareness to that. And then communicating an appreciation towards that glimmer, staying with that glimmer, giving yourself a longer experience of taking it in, really feeling and noticing, enhancing, and just feel what happens. Notice what happens when you bring your attention to that glimmer, and just see if there's any sense of the glow that emanates, and how that might be reflected in your nervous system, and in particular in the ventral vagal part of your nervous system. Here's another exercise from Deb Dana called anchoring. And the ventral vagal anchor helps us stay connected to the energy of the ventral vagal system. So especially when experiences threaten to pull us into a sympathetic or dorsal vagal state. So it's an exercise that helps us identify experiences that anchor us in the ventral vagal state using the categories of who, what, where, and when. So our anchors are clear and readily available and easily accessible to support us in dysregulated states. And apparently a sankalpa is a psychic ventral vagal anchor. So let's spend some time thinking about what you could use as an anchor in times of dysregulation or in times of sensed dysregulatory freefall. And we can think about this in a number of ways to land on an anchor that could work really well. So one way of thinking about a very helpful anchor is who. Who is someone that gives you a feeling of safety and welcome. It could be a person, it could be a pet, it could be a spiritual figure, it could be a mentor. And thinking about what? Perhaps what are things that you do that bring you ventral vagal, a sense of ventral vagal safety, or brings your ventral vagal system alive? Where? What are physical spaces that give you cues of safety? We can think of when. What times do you feel anchored in your ventral vagal energy? For some people it's first thing in the morning. It might be you're doing something at a particular time. So if you can now, just from things that have landed for you from those different perspectives, see if you can just make an anchor out of those things so that you can bring them to mind or bring them to awareness, a sense of destabilization, sympathetic arousal or falling into collapse. It feels like there's some risk of that. Okay, well, we have reached the conclusion of this presentation. Thank you so much for having me. I hope this framework really supports your work in and around the disciplines that you're that you're learning. I hope it supports you in your own health and well-being. Our nervous system is such an important organ for our overall health. For it to function well and fluidly is so important that it reaches a place where it protects us when we really need protecting, but knows how to be responsive when that's what we really need. A nervous system that operates in dysregulation is very exhausting and frustrating. So in your own journey in this space, I wish you well. I've found Polyvagal Theory an extremely helpful way to support me in my own journey of health in this space, and just makes so much sense to me when we think about it in the context of yogic and meditation practices. And a couple of resources here. The Body Keeps the Score is a book by Bessel van der Kolk that has been around for some time now, but is considered one of the best books to understand the impacts of trauma. And within that, there's a chapter dedicated to the power and effectiveness of yoga to help bring health and healing to the injured nervous system. And then 2 books by Deb Dana, both extremely good, but the Polyvagal Theory in Therapy is just a slightly deeper dive. So for those of you that have really felt that this is an incredibly helpful framework and kind of makes sense to you, I really encourage you to get this book. And then there is a partner book which takes you into the exercises, 2 of which we explored, and many more that are extremely good in helping us develop the sense and capacity to be connected to and feel the states of the nervous system, and then in that conscious connection with the nervous system, help shape it to the most neuroceptively accurate state for us to operate from. So I wish you